Psalm 14. The fool has said in his heart, there is no God. They are corrupt. They have done abominable works. There is none that doeth good. May God bless the reading of His Word. Bible. Alright. So today what I'm going to do is I have given a rendition of the ontological argument, and then I've applied this argument to creationism. Now, I'm not giving an ontological argument for creationism. I'm giving an ontological argument for God and showing the logical conclusions of creationism. Now, a lot of people don't quite understand the ontological argument, and there's several different versions, and I put a couple different versions in here. I'm going to go through my blog, okay, that's why I got this, and basically kind of like go through it step by step, okay. So now this is kind of like a modal argument with a Cartesian starting point. So the first premise, maybe I'll go through the premises, all right? So the premises in the modal form is it is possible that God exists, premise 1. Premise 2, if it is possible that God exists, then God exists in some possible worlds. Premise 3, if God exists in some possible worlds, then God exists in all possible worlds. That's premise 3. Premise 4, for God to be a maximally great being in some possible worlds, He must, by definition, exist in all possible worlds. Premise 5, if God exists in all possible worlds, then God exists in the actual world. So, let me go through there. So for premise 1, which is it is possible that God exists, I give the Cartesian argument of Descartes. His premise was this: A, I think, therefore I am. The starting point of rational Descartes premise that is a priori observation. So it is self-evident. Okay, when I think about this, I'm thinking about this. Okay, so I know that I'm thinking because I'm thinking. Okay, so that is evident. It's self-evident. It is something that we start off with, and it is something we're observing. So it's got kind of a evidential flavor to it. It could be kind of like a type of evidence in and of itself. But basically, this is kind of like a presupposition. Well, he says, I think, therefore I am. Basically, Descartes was trying to be skeptical of everything, but when he broke it down, at least he'd have that point to start with. Alright, so, now, if we just said, I know logic because I think, therefore I am, it's not cutting it, okay? Because then you kind of wonder, well, maybe I'm part of some sort of Borg or something. That was like a Star Trek reference, but Next Generation movie, anyway. Okay, so, part B, okay, that was part A. This is to prove the possible. Okay, this is just to prove God is a possibility. Okay, so he says, I think, therefore I am, and I am limited. Okay, so in thinking about this, I say, okay, I am thinking, but I don't know everything, and I have some power, but I don't have all power, definitely. And I have some time duration. Let me see here how I've got it written out. time, existence, intelligence, morality, space, and power. So, I know that there is a right and a wrong. Okay, I have a morality. I've got a thinking and intelligence. I have an existence. I have a time. I have a space. And I have a power. Okay? Now, all these things are limited. Now, how do you know that something is limited? Well, you know that something is limited because it's less than something that is infinite. Okay? And I think I got that from the 1828 Webster's. But yeah, you don't, you have a stopping point, means that you're less than. So it's like, well, even the greatest thing that's limited will just point that there's something that's unlimited. So the greatest thing that we can imagine is the universe, but yet there must be something past the universe, which is infinite. Okay? So the implications of my limitations are unlimitations. Okay? And I am being a limited being. The reverse of me is a maximally great being. So if something is limited, then it is less than that which is greater. So everything with a limit is limited. So that which is not limited is limitless. Thus, for there to be that which is limited, there must be something not limited, which is thus limitless. That which is limitless is God, by definition. In opposition to the faculties of Descartes, that is time, existence, intelligence, morality, space, and power, God is by definition eternal, necessarily existent, which what that means is that all existence is based on his existence. Okay? So not only does he exist, but everything hangs on his existence. And this is omniscient, that means knowing all things. Most good, omnipresent, and omnipotent. Okay? He's everywhere and he's all powerful. By definition, God exists because the limitlessness of limited existence is necessary existence. So because he necessarily exists, because my limited existence implies the unlimitation. Okay, necessary existence is more existence. It means all other existence is dependent upon this existence of what is necessarily existent. Thus, God is the maximally great being. And so that is the first premise. It is possible that God exists. So what I did with that was just make a possibility. I've rationally made it possible. Premise 2. If it is possible that God exists, then God exists in some possible worlds. Now, the rejection of the existence is founded upon only 3 propositions. So in other words, when we start talking about does God exist, the answer to does God exist has 3 possible solutions. Or actually, this is 3 possible rejections. A, God does not exist because God is logically impossible. So it's impossible to even fathom God. Okay? Therefore, he does not exist. God does not exist because God is a myth. God is fiction. God is a myth. That is the second rejection. God does not exist because God is nowhere in or outside of the universe. So this is, we have proved it. We have not found God, and we looked everywhere. Now, when we look at that third part C, that God is nowhere to be found, it's unprovable, since man has no access to either all of which is in the universe, nor all of that which is outside the universe, so it cannot be asserted with any authority. Also, Descartes' first premise begins the faculty of intelligence, which is found in the omniscience of God, has a teleological dimension to it. I am intelligently designed. Thus, it is evidence of God versus no evidence of God. So the fact that I am a thinking person is evidence that, okay, I have an intelligence, therefore there was an intelligent designer. Okay? So what you're dealing with there is that either, like, on one hand, do you have any evidence that there is no God? No, we don't have any evidence that there is no God. Okay? We have reasons to deny, you can argue that way, but you can't actually prove that there is no God. You've not been there. So then any evidence for design automatically starts to favor up in the pro-God era category, I should say. God possibly exists in premise 1, but also we should note that there is evidence of this in the fact that one of the oldest and most productive academic disciplines in the history of civilization is systematic theology, where people all over the world from many faiths have produced written materials in journals. PhDs have been given out, and governments have given accreditation to many such schools. In fact, the most historic thinker in opposition to God was Charles Darwin, who acquired a degree in theology. Thus, people understand a general definition of God. So just that basic idea of God. You'd say, well, it's impossible. Well, on a practical level, it has to be possible. In the world we live in, it has to be possible. Now, first of all, how are you going to deny God if you don't know what God is? What are you denying? Okay? But also the simple fact that people can get up to PhD level understanding of the concept. And that this has been one of the oldest schools of thought. The people have been grading on this issue for millennia. Okay? So this should be a no-brainer. Of course, we can conceive of God. Okay? Now, that was rejection A. So we got rejection A and C done. Now we got rejection B. That is the rejection that says, well, God is a myth. Now, part of the argument for A is based on malformed questions. Okay? So that impossibility of God, the problem is in the question. Can God create a rock too heavy for him to lift? This is kind of one of the ways that they would make that argument. If we are searching the question over whether God logically exists, then the negative must be argued rationally. The idea behind the too big rock, okay, that rock's too big. The too big rock argument requires God to be defined logically. If God logically exists, then God is logical, and if God is logical, he will not be illogical. So, we're even pondering the question shows it's a logical thing to, this is something we can play with here. Is hey, well, does he or doesn't he? Okay. So it's a logical concept because we're even thinking that question. So when they do can God lift a rock too big for him to carry, God would never do that. Okay. And basically it is an illogical premise. That's where the fallacy is. The fallacy is in the question. Okay, instead of the answer, the fallacy is in the question. Premise 3, if God exists in some possible worlds. So remember, what we've now done is we've given an argument for God's existence, and we're just saying that argument, all that we're saying with it, is now it's possible. Okay? Now that we've gone through that, it is now possible that God exists. So, premise 3, God exists in some possible worlds, then God exists in all possible worlds. What is a possible world? A possible world has counterfactual. Okay? I just picked up this mouse. Counterfactual would be, instead of picking that up, I picked up this cup. And you change the whole world, it would be like the exact same with reality, except for that one little thing. Okay? So if we looked at all the different possible worlds, it's possible that God exists in some of them because it is, quote unquote, possible that God exists. So, let's see here. The rejection, B, God does not exist because God is a myth. A myth is an idea which is not real. Ideas that are not real and yet possible are called counterfactuals. Okay? So that goes along with the myth. A possible world is a concept of reality which the world would be seen if one fact were altered without creating a possible world. Right. If it is possible for God to exist in premise 1, then God exists in a possible world. So we covered that. People in the opposition, now they may argue whether necessary existence is justified as a faculty in this argument. But the entire definition of God rests upon necessary existence. What do I mean by that? Alright, basically, God has to exist for them to have any of these aspects of his definition. Okay? So, a myth does not exist, but God is necessarily existent, or exists. A myth is not eternal. A myth is not omnipotent. A myth is not everywhere. A myth is not all-powerful. And a myth is not most good. So those basic, uniform definitions of God, all of them, are down the drain if they are fiction. If they are fiction, then they're not, going to function. Because a myth has no property like that. So if God is a myth, the myth is not God. Also, the mathematician, Gödel, it's spelled almost like a Godel, it's like some sort of Germanic thing, asserted these as essential properties, that's what we called them, to the definition of God. Now, I kind of paraphrase this a little bit because the way he put it was in mathematical language. But here's what Gödel says in paraphrase. A property is essential to a subject if and only if, for all properties, the subject has all properties necessary to be materially equivalent to the property. So there you go again. It's just a natural part of it. You can't really escape it, or you're just talking about something different. So in removing necessary existence of God, every necessary property of the definition is removed, and thus it's not dealing with God at all. Premise 4. For God to be a maximally great being in some possible worlds, he must, by definition, exist in all possible worlds. So if he's really, truly as great as he is, he can't just simply say a myth. He can't just simply be a counterfactual. Okay? So, basically, he has to be omnipotent, has to be all these things, and he has to be real. Alright. Because God stops being God in other possible worlds. Just as light casting out darkness, the equation just keeps repeating itself. God is possible for his very definition. Since the worlds are possible worlds, then God is true in those worlds because by definition God is existent and obviously possible. Thus every idea is dominated under the truth of God's nature. So, I kind of think about like Alexander the Great. He was taking over the world, and it's like Alexander the Great, one nation, boom. Another nation, boom. Another nation, boom. Another nation, boom. Okay. And so, possible world by possible world, it all gets eliminated, almost like a stack of dominoes. There we go. Now, the logic here may not be natural to your sensation. So this is where people get like, huh? What? Wait, what? You know, they get into this mindset of like, how is that possible? You know, it's like, yes, if he's got to be the great being, he has to be the great being in every possible world. And what? Hold on. Well, now the logic here may not be natural to your sensation or your feeling, okay? So this is just an experience you're having because the idea is coming too soon. But this is because you have not experienced the thoughts on their own. Perhaps someone is budgeting with a calculator, and the calculator rings up in a different budget than they had in mind, and perhaps it came up with the calculation instantly. There's a funny skit on The Office where they did this. They were like, oh, you got to crunch the numbers for me. So, dude, the numbers are crunched. Wait, no, do it again. Oh, okay. Dude. Oh, the numbers are crunched. Same thing. It's just an effect by the speed of the argument because you're not comfortable with the logic that is not accountable to your pace of logic. It sounds insane if I tell you that the moon is the property of the United States. Why is it the property of the United States? Assuming the moon landing was not a hoax, Americans were the first people to land on the moon and proved it leaving a flag. Since there were no people to dispute the claim, the land has been claimed by Americans until they give it away. Thus, it is a situation with God, who has claimed not only the universe, but all that which surpasses its boundaries. So, this is kind of one of those things where God has that reach, and we don't have that reach. God knows things that we don't know. Okay? And so since he has these powers, and since he is beyond our thoughts, then it's obvious that he has these natural things by right, and then he can make these claims. Even though it's not natural for our human minds to comprehend, or apprehend, I should say. That's probably a good word. It's not natural for us to apprehend that type of logic. But he is comprehended. Premise 5. If God exists in all possible worlds, then God exists in the actual world. The actual world is a possible world. Necessary existence of God then proves the real world. The real world is not necessarily, even if you get to that I think therefore I am, you're kind of like that Metallica video where you're stuck inside your head. Okay, it was a Metallica video called One back in the day. Doctor, imprisoning me, I sleep, maximum horrors. Okay, it's so. Alright. Okay. So, the actual world is a possible world. After all, the real world is possible. Is reality possible? Yes. Because it's real. Right? The necessary existence of God then proves the real world. Because up until this aspect of logic, I think, therefore I am, starting point was certain, though not subjective. The necessary existence of God is thus giving objectivity, which Descartes lacked. Descartes' existence is now undergirded by the actual world, and the actual world, being possible, is now founded upon the necessary existence of God. So there you go. The subjectivity of logic is now all of a sudden reinforced by God in his inspiration. So, thus ends the normal chain of ontological logic. However, I believe this will imply young earth creationism. Here's a concluding argument. Okay, so how does this apply to creation? Premise 1. The actual world has been undergirded by God, and thus for the universe to be limited duration, and God to be eternal in creation, to be based upon God. God must be the creator. This could be illustrated by the Kalam cosmological argument. And there, basically, we have a universe, a reality that exists, and if it exists, then at some point it began to exist. And so there must be a beginner. And so, let's see here. Premise 2. The creation is the work of God, the maximally great being. Then the process of creation was a process that was maximally great. So if God is doing this, and he's not really being held back by anything, but he is creating, then his creation will be perfect. Okay, so the creation must be perfect. The idea of God must be an idea of divine origins, since the idea of God is divine. So we get this idea, and if it's true, it is divine. Premise 4. The origin of the ontological argument did not start for René Descartes. René borrowed the idea from the medieval theologians. Anselm got the idea from doing devotions through the Psalms, Psalm 14. Fool says in his heart, there is no God. In the form of a prayer, Anselm went on to explain why the denial of Jesus of God was foolish. Thus, the origin of the divine idea was founded upon Scripture. So this idea that has reasoned you to God, okay, is proving God, obviously is from God. Where did we get the idea? Well, Anselm got the idea from the Bible. So then the Bible, by implications, is divine. Premise 5. The scriptures of the Bible produce the ontological argument, and the scriptures should espouse the essential properties of God. The scriptures do identify Jehovah with the essential properties of God. And you can read this at home just because there's a lot of it. Exodus 3:13 through 14. Exodus 15. Deuteronomy chapter 33. Psalm 147, Psalm 139. Luke 137. 1 Kings 8:27. Chronicles 16. Romans 1:20. Acts 17:23. Acts 17:24 and 25. Hebrews 6:16 through Hebrews 6:16 through 18. And Colossians 1:16. So those give us a robust definition of God that we presented. Okay. Yeah. The idea of God and the ontological argument are divine based on the message of Scripture. The message of Scripture is divine. Premise 2. Creation should on a secondary level be in accord with modal and ontological logic. So now the creation has to be divine, and it has to fit modal logic and ontological logic. The theories of origins are thus logically going to be swayed by these two premises. The main understanding of origins can be divided into two general camps: Naturalistic evolution and creationism. Premise 1. Evolution is based upon naturalism, denies all involvement from God. Ontological reason has proven creation to be dependent upon God. And naturalism is not dependent on God. The creation is not maximally great. If you have billions of species of animals dying just to create some good ones, including millions of humanoids that we call Neanderthals, basically all that blood, murder, and death is not the maximally greatest reality. So then, if that's not the greatest reality, premise 3, since the common understanding of the creation message is that God created the world in 7 days, you can say 6 days, whatever, and that it was a paradise, progressive creationism teaches an evolutionary cosmology, though rejection evolutionary biology. A and B. A. It still fails with the fossil record arguing against a maximally good creature. B. It muddies the ability of God to give revelation. The God who is not the author of confusion should not be offering confusion. Should not be offering confused revelation. Either God is not maximally intelligent, or he is not maximally great being. Or he is not maximally good or being honest. Premise 4. A maximally good God is going to create an actual world that is good and free. A. With a good start of creation, the death, according to the Bible, is a result of sin, and thus was conducted by free will. B. God is allowing for free will, but God is also immanent through the Scriptures, thus enticing mankind towards the good and towards the maximally great, which will be a greater ending than the beginning, as the maximally great being has chosen the possible world for eternity. Thus, the young earth creation with paradise and destruction is more in line with the Bible and the ontological argument. And ontological logic. Alright, so there you have it. I think the simple thing is that the atheist has to give some definition of God, and they're always going to distort it because they know that they're not going to win on these points. So there you have it, and we'll see you for a later video.